You will sleep better than you have ever slept. You've never been this relaxed. Are you ready to change your life? I'm Rusty Diamond, certified hypnotist. You don't need to leave your house. You can stay in your bed. You can stay in your favorite chair. You just need a computer or your phone. You can get a hold of me. Stay at home. I'll make your life better.
Hypnosisisgreat.com.
It's Rusty Diamond, motherfucker. It's Rusty Diamond, motherfucker.
Yo, man. Boom, Miss Rusty. What's up, everyone? It is Monday. Monday, I believe it is Monday. That's what the people tell me. That's what the paper says. The newspaper, right? Like there's a newspaper here. I don't even know. Maybe there's a newspaper person that comes by and drops off the newspaper. I don't know what the newspaper is called here. So, information fact. Tons this morning. Thank you, everyone, for being here on the Rusty Diamond Podcast Network. Welcome to the podcast, the public access podcast out of Pennsylvania, the podcast. Yeah, thank you, everyone, for being here and, doing your Monday, or maybe it's a different day of the week. You're listening to this later. If you're listening to it and you're like, I wonder what this guy looks like. I want to see what everyone looks like here. You can check it out on YouTube. But if you're watching this on YouTube and you go, I fucking hate looking at this guy's face. I'd rather just hear his voice because I like the content. You can go anywhere you listen to podcasts, probably unless you have some hipster obscure one. Then I'm probably am not on that. But I'm on a lot of them, gosh darn it. So it's time for me to bring on my special guest. And my special guest is right here and right now. And my special guest right here and right now is Joel McKay. How you doing, Joel?
Good. How you doing, Rusty?
Good. I'm pretty good. Pretty good. It's Monday, man. I like my Mondays. So I like my Mondays. I like my coffee or something like that.
Yep.
Whatever. Insert some punchline here. So okay, so we were talking before. So you're up in Prince George. So you're up there. You're up close to the Yukon then?
Yeah, it's about halfway up British Columbia. So
That's it.
we're about well, actually, you know what? We're closer to Vancouver than we are the Yukon by driving distance.
Wow.
Put it that way. But it's it's like a big province, right? So, it takes 10 hours to get to any major city. I think Whitehorse, if I were to drive from Prince George to Whitehorse, it'd be 5, 4, 4, so 13 hours or something like that to get up there.
Whoa. Okay. And
Yeah.
so do you do these drives ever, or are you
Yeah.
pretty staying in your place or
No, my job, my day job. So I run an economic development organization that serves all of northern BC, which is like actually 75% of the province, believe it or not. And so part of the gig is driving around. So we
Oh,
occasionally think nothing about driving 4 hours for a 2 hour meeting, and then 4 hours back, or ripping out to Terrace or Prince Rupert. That's a 6 or 8 hour drive. Or we were talking about Bella
uh,
Coola before. One time I spent 3 days traveling in December to get in and out of Bella Coola for a 2 hour meeting. So, it happens. But you
whoa.
get to see British Columbia, which is, I love it. I love this part of the world. I love traveling around. It's an adventure. So I don't complain.
Yeah, man, I loved driving up in there. All these, it'd be the most random places, but it's probably not as random to you, but it was so cool just to and everything was a huge drive. There was nothing
Yeah.
Nothing close. So I mean, got to spend a lot of time with friends. And are you usually driving alone then? Um,
It depends. I have a lot through the years, but there's times where I've got colleagues with me, and those are the best because we always say in our business, you don't. The best way to get to know somebody is road time. If you're not getting along with somebody or you're trying to figure somebody out, the best way to solve that is road time. So that's often a prescription for HR issues. If you got two people that aren't getting along, is you conspire to get the two of them into a vehicle together and send them out somewhere into the outback of British Columbia for a couple days, and 9 times out of 10, they come back with a really strong relationship. And the one time that they don't, well, at least they figured each other out and enough to work.
time to get a new job.
Yeah, pretty
Time,
much. Yeah,
time to
yeah,
do something different. And I mean, like, yeah, how many movies have they made off of stuff of that nature? Yeah, you got to put these two guys out on the road, and I hate you, and then at the end,
yeah.
something good always happens. And so, what are you doing when you're on these? You have all this time, you know, even let's say like a 4 to 6 hour drive. What are you doing? Are you if you're by yourself, let's say you're by yourself, what are you
Yeah.
doing for 4 to 6 hours
On the drive,
on the drive? Yeah.
um, podcasts, sometimes audiobooks, sometimes music, sometimes just quiet and thinking. I moonlight as a fiction writer, so it's road time can be really good for me to just get out and sort of watch the landscape roll by and work through a plot problem or a character problem or whatever it is that I'm trying to figure out in the story I'm working on. So
And
for me, I find like it sounds like I don't know if it sounds hoity-toity or weird or what, but like I find getting out on the land in like fills me up. Like it's actually creatively inspiring to drive around. So um that's part of the reason why I call this part of the world home. It's not just that I love living in Prince George. I do love living in Prince George, but actually the real attractant is that I get access to all these other places in northern BC that you just otherwise wouldn't because it takes so damn long to come up here if you don't live up here.
right. Um, and so are you, stopping and pulling out your typewriter and being like, okay, well, have you gotten pretty good at driving with your typewriter and being able to
No,
multitask and do
no,
both yet?
the one downside is that if you come up with a really good idea on the road, you need to actually hold that onto that in your head. I mean, you could pull over and take notes, but usually on those drives, you're kind of trying to make good time and get to that place. But the bigger issue is that the highways up here are not like interstates. Like it's a two
Oh,
lane
okay.
it's a 2 lane highway that's twisting through mountain passes and along big rivers, right? And
Yeah.
we get 6 months of winter here, so it can be dicey driving conditions if you're caught out in a winter storm or whatever it is. So, and there's big animals, so you got to keep your eyes peeled for moose and bear and deer and elk and all kinds of things that could be crossing the highway. So driving in northern BC is not for the faint of heart. There's long distances between communities where there's no cell service, there's no homes. It's nothing but wilderness for 100 kilometers before you get to the next town.
Wow.
And you got to keep your eyes peeled because there's not only the other traffic that's kind of coming at you in the lane right next to you. Often, big semi trucks, pulling logs or moving material or whatever it is. But there's also the animals and the crazy drivers that you also have to watch out for who seem to think that driving up north means that there's no rules. And those of us who live here are like, no, it'd be nice if you followed the rules. So yeah, I
Yeah.
have to wait. The short answer, man, is I gotta wait until I get to my destination, and then I rapidly try and write down whatever things
So,
I thought were good ideas at the time.
so what are you doing? Do you have like do you go with the legal pad? Do you have a notebook? Do you have sticky notes? Do you use your phone, or do you pull out your laptop?
Yeah, usually phone and
Chiseled.
laptop. Yeah, phone and laptop. So I've always got running notes on my phone for whatever stories I'm working on. And then usually if I'm in the midst of something, like I'll trade a Word file back and forth between my work laptop and my personal laptop. So if I'm hitting the road, I can keep working on it. Because the
Okay.
other thing is you end up in it's kind of a benefit, but when you drive around, you go to these places. There's a lot of times where you got to overnight before you head back the next day, or maybe you're doing a couple days out there for the day job, and so you got evenings where you could be like, what are you going to do? You're going to sit and watch old reruns of Matlock in your hotel room, or are you going to try and
Right.
get some work done? So for me, those nights in the hotel are actually pretty productive for writing. I can just sort of, buckle down and I don't have any distractions. I don't have anywhere else to be. I'm going to be there that night anyway. And so having the laptop is pretty handy for making progress on whatever I'm trying to write.
So, are you ever like, I don't know, like stuck anywhere? Like you said, you got 6 months of winter. Are you, or is it like, because that's what I thought Minnesota was gonna be like. I was like, oh, dude, okay, I'm just gonna be snowed in for fucking 6 months of the year. Or is it like you can still kind of get out everywhere anytime you want?
You can get out anywhere anytime you want. The I have been stuck though. Like there's been times where we've had to stop on the way back from somewhere and get a hotel in a road before we get to our destination. We have to get a hotel for the night because the driving conditions in a winter storm are just too dangerous to be on the road. And so that's happened more than once. Or there's a big accident on the highway that'll shut down the highway for 12, 15 hours. Well, you're not going to wait for that, especially in the winter. And then there's been times where, you're driving through the Rockies in the winter and in a blizzard, and you might be like, I can remember one instant where the snow was so heavy coming through the Rockies that we were pushing snow with the bumper of the car, like coming over a rise. Like it was
Whoa.
probably shouldn't have driven that day, but it was impossible to know what the weather was going to be like in the mountains until we got into it. And then you're stuck because you're in the mountains and there's no cell service and there's nowhere to shelter. So yeah, you get stuck at times. But the funny thing that I learned, because I'm originally from Vancouver, so I was born and raised on the
Oh,
coast,
okay.
and the weather down there is pretty temperate. It's pretty easy going year round. You don't get much of winter. Up here, it's changing now, but what's true is that once it gets cold, it stays cold, and the conditions they're as good for driving as they are in the summer.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, when you get down to -10, -20 or colder, like the pavement almost gets sticky.
Yep.
So the conditions are as good as driving around in the summer. So you can get around pretty easy.
That's kind of how Minnesota was. It's just like it's just business as usual, and it's
Yeah,
yeah, negative 20 degrees out or whatever. And it's like,
yeah, it's
okay,
funny. In Vancouver, they have snow days. So when I was a kid, if you got like, half a foot of snow, maybe even only 4 inches, you'd get up in the morning and you would listen to the radio or you'd watch TV, and
yep.
hopefully, your school district would be on the radio as being shut down for that day and you get a free snow day. And in Vancouver, like 4 to 6 inches of snow is a big deal, and like the whole city shuts down. But in Prince George, if we got a foot and a half or 2 feet of snow overnight and it was -30 out, everybody's still going to school and work. Like there's no such thing as a snow day up here. And so
Yeah.
I found that pretty funny when I moved up here.
Yeah, I mean, it was same thing in Portland, just the
Yeah,
littlest amount, and they didn't use salt on the road there. I think they might now, but just until recently they didn't use salt. So it was like, well, you get like just that much snow, and it's like, all right, shut everything down.
yeah.
Yep,
It
we're
actually
done.
it actually doesn't take much to really screw up a city if you don't know how to handle a winter storm when it arrives, right? So places like
Yeah,
yeah, Portland, Seattle, Vancouver, they really struggle when winter kind of shows up because they get winter often enough for it to be a problem, but not often enough to actually invest, time and thinking into, putting the machinery and equipment in place to actually manage a storm. So we
yeah.
always laugh every time. probably right across the country. Every time Vancouver's on the news for a bad winter storm, the rest of Canada's kind of just laughing, like, well, it's Canada. Like, what did
Yeah,
you think was going to happen, right?
right. Um, so did you live in Vancouver when growing up, or were you like in a suburb or
All over. So born and kind of raised in a town that's right next to Vancouver called Burnaby, and then
Burnaby? Yeah,
right
all
next
right.
to yeah, right next to that, Port Moody, Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam. But you know,
Poco, man.
yeah, Poco, yeah,
Fuck yeah.
through work or school and living. I'm one of those people that actually lived or worked in every municipality in the Lower Mainland at some point in time. And the last place I lived before I moved up to Prince George was just outside of downtown Vancouver in a little neighborhood called South Granville. And I and
Okay,
I
yeah.
worked downtown for a paper at the time. So yeah, kind of experienced the gamut of it and love that place. It's a great city. It's a lot of fun. It's beautiful.
So did they just say like, hey, you got this? Did they transfer you? Do you find something new? And then you ended up going like you're gonna go to Prince George. You're like, wait, what?
Yeah, pretty much, man. Like so so my gig at the time, so this is 12 years ago now. I was a journalist for a business newspaper in Vancouver, and I covered mining, oil, gas, forestry, fisheries, some agriculture. That was kind of my gig. And when you do that work, you travel because you want to see mines and sawmills and gas plants so that you can report on them to the business community and what's going on with them. And so that led me up here. And I had never really traveled up north in Canada before, or certainly not very far in British Columbia. I'd made it probably as far as Kamloops previous to that, which is not very far from Vancouver, if we're being honest. And I fell in love with it. And so it took me, it was about 2 years of traveling up as a journalist for stories, and just fell in love with the lifestyle, the people, the place. I'm a big outdoors guy, so I love fishing, particularly fly fishing, and this is a mecca for that. And I was looking for a change and an adventure. And I don't know if you've heard, but Vancouver is a ridiculously expensive city to live in, and it's difficult to get ahead there, especially on a journalist salary. So I made the decision to pull the plug on journalism because the future of that industry wasn't looking all that bright 12 years ago, and it's still not, sadly. And so moved into working for the organization I work for now, which is an economic development trust for all of northern BC. And it was a bit of a natural migration. I went from journalism to public relations for the trust here in Prince George, and then was fortunate enough to take over as CEO about 8 years ago. So I've been really lucky. I've had a good ride, but it's funny. Like when I told my friends, hey, I'm moving to Prince George, people are like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, you've got a good job, you live in Vancouver, it's one of the most livable cities in the world. Like, we would have thought if you're going to move, you'd go to, Toronto or Ottawa, maybe Calgary. Like, what are you doing going north? Nobody goes north. Have you heard Prince George is the armpit of British Columbia? Like, again, Joel, what the fuck is wrong with you? Why would you go there? And so I kept telling them, I'm like, no, like actually, like it's great up there, despite what you've heard. And so like I keep saying this, nobody believes me, nobody believes me. So I move up anyway, and people started to visit, friends, family, and after a little while, they're like, shit, man, this place is nice. It's really nice up here. How come we've never heard about this? I'm like, exactly. I'm like, this is my point, right? Like, we don't do a good job talking about some of these places. So anyway, so I've been here ever since.
Which is kind of good. That's something that so like I don't know, like so like Portland, I think in the 70s maybe, um, the governor of the state used to have a motto that was visit but don't stay. And yeah, and then but then everyone was like, oh, finds out how nice it is, and then a lot of people end up
Yeah,
showing up. And but I don't know. I mean, you got to have people that are pretty committed to go and move up to Prince George. So I guess it's not quite like, you
yeah,
know, going to put,
yeah.
which is great.
It's it's not for everybody. Like I say that to people. Like, look, if your lifestyle is going to, Broadway plays all the time and live music seven nights a week, and you want, you want a city where, AAA talent cruises through here for shows and stuff all the time. This isn't that place. Like, it's a city of 80,000 people, maybe 100,000 on, when we've got an event going on, or it's busy for work in the area. And so you do, like, we've got hockey teams, and you can go watch hockey. You can go, there is a theater company here, so you can go watch stage plays. There's a symphony orchestra. You can do all those things. There's music festivals. But it's not like being in, a Toronto, a Montreal, and a New York, right? And nobody's trying to claim that, right? If you want to live in a place like this, it's because you like a smaller center that has the amenities and services, good for raising a family, but truly your rationale for living, 10 hours from the nearest city of similar or larger size is you like the outdoors. You like that lifestyle. And so
Yeah.
I would say to people, like, it's not winter you should be afraid of if you're thinking about moving to a place like this. It's your own ability to, reinvent your life and have a life that's more outdoors. And if you want that, if you want the adventure of that, then this is probably a pretty good place to come.
Yeah, and like Minnesota, a lot of people were just waiting for the winter because they wanted to go ice fishing,
Yeah, yeah,
stuff like that. There's like set up there on the frozen lake, and they got all these little fucking tents and stuff all
yeah.
over the place. And
Yeah, that's pretty
um,
popular here too. Yeah, it's a winter city. One of the things that I love doing is cross country skiing, and so we've got really good cross country skiing facilities here. Fat biking has gotten really popular because so there's a big mountain biking community in this town, and they in the
that's
last, I would say, the last 7-8 years, they've kind of decided they don't like mountain biking only part of the year. They want to mountain bike year round. So now they've got fat bikes, and trails are getting groomed through the winter. And so it's
cool.
and yeah, there's ice fishing. It's different species than you'd get in Minnesota for sure. But yeah, lots of lakes, and people like to get out there, have a fire on the lake, and do some ice fishing and hang out. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, it's a pretty good deal. And so has that made it into any of your stories, that sort of life,
Yeah,
or is it,
yeah,
you know,
yeah, very very much so. And I don't think I planned it out this way, but I think somehow through my life I just sort of fell in love with British Columbia, the place, the history, like all of it. And I've been very privileged. Like, I've been able to travel around the entirety of this province for work and see it, pretty much all of it, which is not an easy feat, and not a lot of people get to do it. And so, like, and I'm a nerd, so like I love reading about the history of British Columbia and like Canada and what, how this place came to be, and both pre-contact and post-contact. But um so yeah, it figures largely in my fiction. So my first novella, which is a werewolf novella, it's set here in Prince George. The latest book that came out, which is a series of short stories, every one of them has a tie to northern BC in some way, even if it's in another world. I might have used the landscape as an inspiration, or it might actually be set here. So the lead story in that one is about tree planters, and as you can probably guess, tree planting is a big business up in this part of the world. So yeah, it figures largely place, notions of place. And I write horror, and like, I don't mean to besmirch the part of the world that I live in, but northern BC is a really good setting for horror. Like, it's that was something about the wilderness, the vast area, the sparse population, the harsh climate at times, I think makes for really good setting, and so it's fun. So yeah, I most definitely root my stories in this place. And by place, I mean all of British Columbia. So there's a preponderance for stories here in the central interior in and around Prince George, but I would just as soon write something set in Vancouver or Haida Gwaii or Bella Coola.
hella cool, man. You ever go over to onto the island?
Yeah, yeah, I've spent a
Is
lot of
that
time there. Yeah. How about yourself? Have you been onto the island?
somehow I didn't go over there. Like there was I never got booked over there, which was weird.
It's
but
sweet.
it's and it's big.
It's big. Yeah.
It's
So it's big. And it's very like depending on whereabouts you are on the island, it's all very different. So if you're down in Victoria, like it's the capital of the province and it's a busy small regional center. But it's very historic. So you get lots of Victorian era architecture there, and you can definitely feel sort of like the colonial kind of aspects of it. But you get to up to Mid Island, Nanaimo on the east side, and you're in a pulp mill town, and it's rainforesty. But you've got good beaches, water's pretty calm. Place like Parksville, really good beaches. But then if you go to the west side, Tofino, Ucluelet, that's surfing country, and like it's open ocean all the way across the Pacific from there. So the storms that roll in, the waves that roll in, the beaches are miles long. Like it's just stunning, like absolutely stunning. And it's like that all the way up the island, through like Campbell River, Port McNeill, Port
uh,
Hardy. It's pretty cool. A guy could spend a life just exploring Vancouver Island, and it would not be a wasted life, in my opinion. So if you ever get a chance, jump on it. It's a great
okay.
place, and it sounds like because you lived in Portland for a bit, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's the same climate. Probably a few degrees cooler than Portland is at any given time, but same idea. Wet coastal, rainy. Beaches and stuff like that. Portland's a
Yeah.
super cool town too, actually.
Yeah. It's interesting. It has a wild past
Yeah,
of like holy shit, man. Like this stories about that place. Um, some of them are pretty dark, but
yeah.
you
Did
know,
you when
yeah.
you were in or how long did you live in Oregon?
From 1987 until 2019. So a few years here and
Few
there.
years, man. So
Yeah.
did you, because I've been fortunate to drive around Oregon. So I've been into Eastern Oregon. So I've been through
Oh yeah.
like Bend and then all the way out east because my folks live in southern Idaho, believe it or not.
Oh,
So
whereabouts?
Pocatello.
Oh, Pocatello. Okay, cool. Yeah, I know Pocatello, man. A cool area down there, man. I was living in Salt Lake City for a little bit, and so
That's a
it's
cool that's a cool town.
pretty quick drive over there.
Yeah, yeah. So when driving down to visit in Idaho, I kind of took advantage of the proximity to Oregon a few times. So drove through Eastern Oregon and then all the way down to like Florence and then up the coast all the way up to Astoria or through Eugene, and then up the five. And
Oh
like
yeah.
Oregon's like not a big state comparatively.
Yeah.
But man, is it diverse? Like there's a lot of cool stuff to look at in Oregon. That's another place you could spend a lot of time just roaming around and exploring, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like kind of like, same day you can go to the mountains or the beach or I guess the coast.
Mhm.
You can't say you go on the beach in Oregon. There's not really it's not really beachy, I
Yeah,
guess is the way to put it. But and yeah, man, like I love the the high desert, man. That high desert, that's just something like
yeah, it is.
I like that climate out there, like in Bend and like up by Pocatello and
Yeah.
yeah, like so like are there hot springs up there up in Prince George area?
They're not right here, but in various parts in northern BC, there are. So there's some hot springs in Valemount, which is about 3 hours east of here, in a part of Kinbasket Lake, which is this gargantuan lake that's set right in the Rocky Mountains. So there's hot springs there. There's hot springs on Haida Gwaii. There's actually hot springs not far from Bella Coola, if you know where to look. Hot springs south of Terrace, hot springs in the Nass Valley. And then there's also probably the most famous hot springs in northern BC. And listeners are going to laugh because it's not a day trip. It's a place called Liard. And you would drive, let's see, it would be 5 hours to Fort St. John from here, 4 hours to Fort Nelson, and then another 3 hours up to Liard. So 9 and through, so 12 hours, so 11 or 12 hours north of here, still in British Columbia. But you're at the very top of the province, just before you cross into Whitehorse. There's a place called Liard, and it's like this natural hot springs they built. Like this big parking lot, and there's a change area and a deck around it and everything. But the coolest part about it is it can be like dead of winter up there and you're in boreal forest, but right there's ferns and there's all kinds of stuff. It feels like a kind of tiny little micro tropical climate.
Wow.
It's super cool. It's if you like road trips and you like travel around this part of the world, it's a must see on the Alaska Highway, and to stop at. And there's lots of legends around it too. If you read the history of British Columbia, stories about, when settlers were first coming here, about this, mystical tropical valley that existed somewhere in northern British Columbia, and some people had found it and some people hadn't. And of course, most of the tale is bullshit. Like, it's not, it's not a valley, it's not mystical, there's nothing magical that I'm aware of about it. But it does exist. There is a basis for the myth and some of the stories around it, and it's up there. So yeah, there's hot springs. There's hot springs all over BC, but they're nothing within an hour or two of Prince George that I'm aware of. But that's the funny thing. There might be people here in town who listen to this. They're like, Joel's full of shit. Actually, there is a hot springs. We just didn't tell them. It's,
Right.
45 minutes outside of town. We're not advertising it, right? That could also be a possibility.
That could definitely be a possibility. I mean, they're so easy for those ones. Like, just going to a place and yeah, I'll ask, like, where's the hot springs? Like, okay, where do the, where the locals go? And then like, fuck this guy. Like,
Yeah.
we'll take you to this one. You can go to this one.
Yes.
And then the last one I was told about, where I asked that question, it ended up being a place where there was a lot of orgies and stuff going on, and I was like, okay, well, thanks for that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the spot.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe when they get the answer back, it's like be a little more discriminating, right? With,
Yeah,
whether it's if it's an orgy hot springs, maybe I'm not going to show up for that. But
right.
they probably, when they told you that, they were probably laughing hysterically, thinking this poor bastard's going to go
Yeah,
there, right? And he's going to stumble
yeah,
on some shit he didn't want to see.
yeah. Like, oh, okay, well, shit. All right, that's what's happening here. Cool, man. Yeah, there. That was up in like in Lava Hot Springs. So it's sort of like, it's how far is it? Not too far from Pocatello.
Yeah,
Maybe, yeah,
I've been there.
maybe within an hour or so.
Yeah,
And so
it's
there's
about a
some,
yeah. Yeah, it's on the road down to Salt Lake. If I remember correctly, it's about an hour sort of southeast-ish. Yeah, I've been into Lavac.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, that one, man. Like, so there's some little offshoot right there that's just outside of town, where there's a lot of orgies that go. I think the whole place, there's their stuff.
Yeah.
It's cool. Whatever.
Yeah.
That's kind of what's going on there. But so do other things kind of come into play, like with the history of BC, or even like you're saying with legends? Like, is there something up that way? Like, because I know down in the Coquihalla in fucking, there's the Ogopogo in the
Yeah. Yeah.
in near Kelowna, man. And is there stuff like that, like some sort of something up there, or is that something that's just like, yeah, it's just not going to go in any of the.
There there's nothing there's nothing up here that's like there's nothing quite like Ogopogo up here, in the sense that Ogopogo is this big giant myth about this lake monster, like British Columbia's version of Loch Ness, that is, specific to that lake, and has stories around it. That's actually pretty unique in British Columbia. I mean, there's Bigfoot everywhere, right? So Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to talk about, like there's been sightings all over British Columbia. And I think British Columbia is like Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. is just like a mecca for sightings of that, right? So
Right.
this would probably be a good place. Not that I've written one, but I would say anywhere in British Columbia, you're on pretty fair ground if you want to start writing, Bigfoot stories, or maybe, Ogopogo stories. The, often this, you got to be careful because there's a lot of stories about supernatural creatures and spirits that come out of indigenous myth and legend in this part of the world that predate Europeans coming here by tens of thousands of years in some cases, and I think there's a really emerging ground for artists to go in and explore those stories. But you got to be super careful because if it's not your culture, it's easy to misinterpret it and screw that up.
Yep.
And one of the things that I was taught is I spent back when I was a reporter, I spent 2 or 3 days out on the Ts'alis Reserve, which is out near Chilliwack, just sort of east of Vancouver.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found when I was out there learning about the people and the culture there is that Sasquatch is actually their national symbol. And it's not a scary monster like it is in, sort of Western European movies. It's actually a symbol of luck. If you happen to see this a Sasquatch or something
Cool.
out on the land, then you are considered lucky. That's a blessing. And that was a wake-up call for me, for somebody who loves monster stories and is going to sit them and base them in British Columbia, to be really, really careful about that. Because those aren't my stories to tell. It's not my culture. But B, I also don't think you can ignore it. Like I think, whether you're white or you're indigenous or you're a person of color, if you say, okay, well, I'm going to write stories and I'm going to base them in British Columbia, you have to acknowledge the breadth of history that's here. And so it's this continual question for me around, okay, so I'm going to write stories. They're going to have monsters here. How do I, include and make sure I'm being inclusive of, indigenous people, indigenous history in this place, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And so fascinating to learn about, without, twisting it into something that is disrespectful to the culture. So where that lands for me mostly is I invent the creature and the monster, typically, and it will be something that maybe is a species that exists here, that something weird is going on with. So the lead story, and it came from the trees, the one about the tree planters, it's about beetles, parasitic beetles, that a group of tree planters stumble on in the forest outside of Prince George, and it takes over their body. It kind of hatches in them, and then they become like, it's a gruesome, disgusting kind of beetle. But like, and then you ask the question, well, what's the history? Well, yeah, there's beetles in northern BC, so that's number one. But the bigger history here for the last 15, 20 years has been the pine beetle epidemic, which has devastated our forests and killed most of the mature pine in northern British Columbia. So we actually did have an infestation of beetles. Now, it didn't manifest itself as a parasite that takes over the human body, but
Yeah.
it devastated our forests, and devastated our forest industry, and by extension then devastated our communities and the people who relied on that industry for their livelihood. So that's kind of where I come in with it. I try to strike this balance of being reflective of the area without weighing in on shit that I have no business weighing in on.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. And so does that kind of put you in, like, do you have to, is this like something that comes up in your head, or do you just sort of like process that and just kind of go through it real fast? Do you have to like think about this and go through kind of what you just sort of talked to me through there in your head
Yeah,
before
yeah,
you get into it?
it's different for everything, right? So like the novella that I wrote that's based here, Wolf at the Door, it's a classic werewolf story. So I didn't really go through that. It's about a family that's all come together for a Canadian Thanksgiving dinner, which is in October. and none of them get along, and they have a terrible dinner, mostly just because they don't get along and they say things to one another that they shouldn't have said. So if you've ever seen National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation and you're thinking about the dinner scene with the dry turkey and everybody's at their wits' end,
Right.
that's the first half of that novella. And the second half is when the werewolves show up and start eviscerating people, and sort of that now this family's requirement to figure out how they're going to get along to survive the night. But from a supernatural perspective, it's set in a house, it's set in October, it's on the outskirts of Prince George. And so those broader themes about history and culture and stuff that I didn't really need to consider or bring into directly, because um, it's a werewolf tale, and so it's just a classic werewolf tale. It's not that not overly complicated. But there have been other stories, like It Came from the Trees. There's a novel I'm working on right now that's actually, the setting for it is like a Bella Coola. It's on the Central Coast, and where there are indigenous characters, and I did have to think about, okay, so how do I do this in a way that's respectful and balanced, and without diving into some nation's mythology, and then butchering it, in an attempt to write a really cool supernatural story, and screwing all that up. So there are times where, yeah, I'm thinking about it a little bit more in depth, depending on place and character and all those other things. And then there's times where, no, I'm just writing a shitty old pulpy monster story, and this doesn't really, factor into it. But I think you've got to be, there's a degree of self-awareness in all of it that I try to manage. And I'm not going to claim that I'm perfect on that. But hopefully I'll get better over time.
Yeah. And that's what it matters. Like, you're,
Yeah.
you know, uh, yeah. So then are you like talking to anybody? Or you like, I don't know, because it's kind of hard. Like then it's like, well, I talked to one person from the, but that's something that's also hard that like I find issue with a lot of times, and it's like, oh well, here's one person from this thing. Let them represent every single person. It's like,
Yeah.
well, you don't know if you got crazy fucking Freddy over here that's
Yeah.
like a fucking whack job. Like I don't want that to represent everyone that
Yeah.
is in my whatever certain demographic. But so do you like, yeah, you don't have like a certain number of people you talk to, or like do you just you do your research?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. And again, it's story dependent, or what you're trying to create that's dependent. So one of the things that, I've been fortunate about to have, and living in this part of the world does it, and the nature of my day job does it, is you get to know a lot of people in different parts of northern BC and British Columbia. So you actually have a lot of people that in other contexts that you could reach out to and just say, hey, I'm trying to get this piece right. I think you've got to get really clear around, okay, well, like, I'm not going to be token here. Like, I'm not going to spend 3 months, getting every little detail in my head absolutely correct for what is really a paragraph's length in a story. Like, the juice ain't worth the squeeze on that.
Yeah.
And so you've got to figure out, where you can hover, where you can generalize from a research perspective, so that you're striking a balance. There's a couple of stories in the latest collection. It Came from the Trees, because that's a collection of 5 stories. There is 2 stories in there where I very specifically went out and got some help from people who had different backgrounds to help me clarify things. So one of them is a science fiction thriller about teleporter technology, and a couple of physicists who invent it. And basically, the airline industry wants to kill these guys and shut down their research, because teleporter technology, of course, would put an end to the airline industry.
Right.
So a friend of mine at the university here locally, he's a physicist. So I based that story in the most recent research in that field around where we're at right now with inventing teleporter technology. So there was a couple of details in the story that I did want to get right, so that it felt like the 2 main characters, who are physicists. Like, I'm not a goddamn physicist, so I don't know how physicists think or what they say.
Right.
So I wanted that piece to, when they're speaking or what they're thinking about, I needed it to resonate. I needed that to feel like it was true. So I went to my friend and said, "Hey, can you take a look at this and give me some advice?" And you do have to acknowledge, to your point, like it's only one person, right?
Yeah.
The other story in there is called The Silent Screamer, and it's about a couple of teenagers who end up in London, trying to repatriate some cultural artifacts from their nation here in British Columbia at a private museum. And then they end up caught up in this private museum that's also captured in like an eldritch god. And
Okay.
there's a piece in there around a raven mask. And so I needed, and that does draw on a broad, generalized sort of history and mythology of the raven myth from indigenous culture here in British Columbia. And so I wanted to get that right. So there was a lot of reading into, different origin raven myths of nations to understand them around British Columbia. And I did actually seek out a scholar who specializes in that area to get her opinion on it and pass muster. And what I had to be careful of too is, just because that individual has given me their advice, that doesn't serve as an endorsement. So, like, if I still screw it up, if it doesn't land, I can't go out and claim and point to that person and say, well, they told me it was okay. No, I still own all of this, right? And have to accept, if I screw it up or I, misinterpret something or am in any way disrespectful. So I think you're always inherently, taking a risk. You want to get it right. You got to balance it with the amount of time you want to put research into it. But you got to own it. It's your art at the end of the day. And so you research to the extent you want to back up a story that you're creating, or make the decision, if you don't want to do that, then don't write those stories. Leave those for others.
And then, so are you putting people, like directly into the stories, or
No,
people based around anyone, or
no,
you don't want to mention,
no.
like you're gonna have a friend or a family member be like, hey, that kind of seems like some of my characteristics.
Yeah, it probably because I'm a shitty writer. But I couldn't, even if I tried, I could not recreate somebody on the page as a facsimile of somebody in real life. I don't think I would ever get that correctly. So I actually don't fear that I would accidentally fall into that, where one of your characters is that person. I would say it's true that for all characters and all character creation, like it seems to me anyway, that you are drawing on characteristics, attributes, styles of speaking, styles of acting, from people you've run into in your life, things you've seen before. Um, it would be difficult to create characters with characteristics and attributes that you've never seen before. How can you write about that if you've never seen that in somebody before, or a shade of that?
Yeah.
But I've never written a character who is like, that's that person or that's based on that person. I think A, that's disrespectful. I think B, you're just lining yourself up for failure. And if you're a creative writer, like, for crying out loud, you should have the ability to just invent people from scratch. Like, why would you base a character off of somebody you know, unless that is the story? Like, that is the story you're trying to write, is about something that this person did, and you novelize them and whatever else. That's a whole other conversation. But for me anyway, I just think, well, you just invent somebody and you draw it and you figure out who that person is and draw in characteristics from your experiences through life. And hopefully, if you've done a good job, you flesh them out to seem like a real person, um, and go from there.
Yeah. My friend Derek always says, what with any character creation, the the way that you know that your character, or like that your character, is if you can take that character and have them, like, doing their mundane thing, and something happens. Like he said, the one he sticks with me is if they go to a fast food restaurant and they order something and their order gets fucked up, how do they react?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I was
that's a
like,
really, yeah, yeah,
you can tell that.
yeah. I think that's great advice. And I think there's like, as you get into the craft after a while, you start figuring out these little hacks for yourself for creating characters that are dynamic and real. One of the things that I do, especially for a longer work, if I've got, main characters, is I will take the character and I'll quickly jot out notes of, okay, who they were, who they are, who they want to be.
That's good.
And I got that from another author. I'm not going to claim that's my idea. It is not my idea. That's somebody far smarter than I advised that years ago. And it works, man, because especially in a longer work where you've got kind of a dynamic character arc for that person. If you plot that out in front, you can actually see that reflected in, to your point, the drive-through reactions, right? Like, who are
Yeah.
they channeling at any moment? Are they channeling who they want to be? Are they channeling who they are? Or are they channeling who they were? And that is really interesting. And I find it, of the two, that the most interesting dichotomy in that to play with is the who they are versus who they want to be. There's like, that's such fertile ground for conflict,
Yeah.
and both of those things are a result of who they were or what their experiences were. And so if you start to flesh that out, now suddenly you've got, back history. These are the things that they did or the things that happened to them or that they experienced that made them who they are, but who they are isn't quite who they want to be. And
Yeah.
so articulate that. So that's helped me, to, I think, I'll claim, only readers can truly say, create characters that feel real, are believable.
Do you have characters that are reoccurring or that are planning to be reoccurring, or um does your world that you've created, is it all in the same, whatever, same universe or world or whatever, and
Yeah,
all
yeah. A
you know
great question. So, as much as I tend to write horror these days, I come out of a background of deeply loving high fantasy and serialized stories. So all the, like, I grew up with Dragonlance. So like, for me, I love that type of universe where you've got recurring characters. There is only two stories right now out of mine where you have a recurring character. Um, but it's something that I am actually planning this year to. There's a couple of characters where I want to do a couple more almost serialized adventures. And so why is that? First of all, I'm a huge fan of Robert E. Howard and his fiction, particularly Conan. Like, just love it. And
all
love
right.
love sword and sorcery stories, and I love that recurring character. Same with like Michael Moorcock and sort of the Elric stories. Love that stuff. So it was about a year and a half ago now. So it's coming up on 2 years ago. There was a publisher in the States, who did a call out for splatterpunk westerns. I also love westerns. So I was like, hey, I've never written a western before. I'm going to write a western and submit to this call. And so I did. And it's a splatterpunk western horror story, with a character named John Hawes, who's a luckless cowboy. It doesn't matter, like, he's a good guy, he's solid, salt of the earth, but doesn't matter what he does, he always finds himself in, trying circumstances, and then he has to shoot his way out. He's that character, right?
Yeah.
And so I wrote the story, and it got accepted, so it appeared,
Actually,
and I loved writing it.
cool.
And so when I was putting together this most recent collection, last summer, I wrote a follow-up story. It's another John Hawes story, and John Hawes rides again, and in this case, comes across a death cult and an eldritch monster, somewhere out in this, Western-esque world. So it's in the collection.
Well,
And I love doing it. And there's another story in this collection that I think is the first of what I hope will be a number about this character. And it's a kind of a grimdark fantasy that is not set in this world. It's a new kind of fantasy world, but it draws its geography from British Columbia, no question. And it's about an escaped, former pit fighter who's trying to outrun, an invading army. and the adventures that kind of pop up along the way. So in both of those, I wanna take those characters further and play with them. And the reason being is I love stories that are pulpy and page turners. And I think that they're, two characters that are primed to sort of reappear again and again. And the kind of thing that you would have found on a newsstand back in the 40s or 50s.
Yeah, and what you would have picked up and started reading and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
turning those pages. And
There's always this question that pops up around audience that people are like, well, who are you writing for, Joel? And like, honestly, the answer, and this may be like, maybe this is extraordinarily unprofessional, but the answer is me. Like it is selfishly me, because I can't, for whatever reason, fathom an audience. I can't wrap my head around some audience that A, is interested in the same things that I am, B, but then like, how does it, so you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm writing for an adult audience that likes fantasy. Well, what the hell does that mean? That's not very concise. So for
Right.
me, to your point, stuff that I would have read, that's what I'm creating. And my hope is that there's more than just me out there, of people who like this kind of fiction, and that it will eventually find its readership. So that's sort of what's going through my head as I'm creating a story, is what's going to get me to the next page. And that's always the goal that I have, is I'm just trying to get the reader to the next page without them noticing. And if I can do that enough times, I can get them to the end. And I figure that if I can do that well enough, then maybe I'll sell some copies, and people will, come back and keep reading my fiction.
So how do people get to the first page of your book? How can they do that? Or
Uh,
either your books, because you have
you go,
two.
yeah, go on Amazon and buy them. So there's an author page there, Joel McKay. You can find it there. Both of my first two books are there. It Came from the Trees and Wolf of the Door. And you can find me also on, I still say Twitter because I can't wrap my head around
Yeah.
X. But Joel C. McKay on Twitter, or author Joel McKay on Instagram or Threads. So that's kind of where to find me and my stuff right now.
Sorry, I mispronounced your name. I thought it would have been straightforward when we started, and that's something I try to like make sure I do. And I'm like,
Oh,
oh, just
don't apologize, man. It's all good. It's McKay. It's an argument amongst members of the clan. So
okay.
the clan is 1,000 years old, and there isn't even an agreement on whether or not, on the spelling, for one, and B, is it McKay or McKay? So that's been an argument that's been going on in the clan for, well, I guess forever and a day. So maybe I have it wrong. I don't know. There's people in the clan that would say that I would. So there you go.
Cool. All right. Well, yeah, thank you so much for being on. It was, yeah, great getting to talk to you and get to where we got to, whatever that was, wherever that was. And I like that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Thanks for having me.
yeah, you bet, man. Good luck. And yeah, we'll see you on down the road. All right.
Yeah. Take care.
You too, bud. All right. That's Joel McKay. McKay. And I'll put links, he said at the end, where you can find him on there. So I'll at least put those. I don't think I have that Instagram one, so I'll put the Instagram or X, one of those, some in there so you guys can find them, or just go to his author page on Amazon. That's probably easier. So thank you everyone for listening. And that is the show, man. Boom.
It's Rusty Diamond, motherfucker. It's Rusty Diamond, motherfucker.